Welcome to another episode of Boring History for Sleep, the only place where medieval suffering becomes your bedtime story. Tonight, we'll be exploring the harsh, sweaty, overhyped reality of being a knight in the Middle Ages. Because let's face it, being a knight sounds cool until you actually have to live like one. So fluff your pillow, take a deep breath, and let's begin the relaxing tale of how absolutely miserable it was to be a medieval knight. You didn't just wake up one day with a sword and a shiny suit of armor. Becoming a knight took years, and not the fun kind. No dragons, no damsels, just aching muscles, endless chores, and people yelling at you. It all started young, like really young. Most future knights began their training around age 7. That's right. While you were learning to color inside the lines or figure out how to tie your shoes, a noble-born boy in medieval Europe was getting shipped off to some distant castle to become a page. Not a page in a book, a page as in a miniature servant. You were basically a glorified errand boy. You helped in the kitchens, cleaned armor you weren't allowed to wear, and delivered love notes between nobles, because even warriors had drama. Did you have to clean up horse poop? Yes. Did you get thanked for it? Of course not. Then, around age 14, if you hadn't run away or died of boredom, you leveled up to squire. Now you were a teenager, which meant you were just old enough to get hit with real weapons. You'd learn to fight with swords, ride horses, and wrestle in armor, usually with zero padding and even less instruction. Squires followed knights around like exhausted assistants. You carried their armor, polished their boots, fed their horses, and hoped they didn't get killed in battle. Because if they did, you were suddenly promoted without the pay raise. But here's the catch, not everyone made it. You could spend your whole youth training only to be rejected at the knighthood ceremony. Maybe you flubbed your vows. Maybe your family ran out of money. Maybe your lord just didn't like your face. And if you did make it, congratulations. You are now a knight. Your reward? Crushing responsibility, danger, and no, you don't get weekends off. Your new full-time job is war, and trust me, it's not the clean, noble kind you've seen in movies. It's chaos, it's mud, it's blunt swords and screaming men and the stench of fear. But we'll get to that soon. For now, just rest in the comforting knowledge that your medieval childhood would have sucked. Breathe in and out, because next we'll talk about armor and how it felt to wear 60 pounds of hot metal in the summer with no deodorant. So now you're a knight. People bow to you, bards sing about your bravery, and somewhere, someone is painting your face on a church wall. But before you ride off into glory, you have to put on your armor, and oh, what a joy that is. Let's start with the basics. A full suit of medieval armor could weigh between 45 to 60 pounds, sometimes more. That's like wearing a kindergartner strapped to your body while you jog into battle. But weight wasn't the worst part. You started by slipping into a gambesson, a thick padded linen tunic. Sounds comfy, right? It was basically the medieval version of being wrapped in a sweaty mattress. It soaked up heat, sweat, and sometimes blood, and it almost never got washed. Then came chainmail, tens of thousands of interlocked metal rings, heavy, stiff, and somehow still able to trap every itchy particle of dust inside it. Over that, plate armor, breastplates, greaves, gauntlets, pauldrons. Every piece had a name you didn't care to remember, because by the time your squire finished strapping it all on, you couldn't move your neck, or bend over, or pee. Which brings us to the bathroom problem. Yes, knights still needed to go, but no, they couldn't just unzip and handle business. They had two options. Hold it, which sounds noble, until you're in a 12-hour standoff and your bladder is about to declare its own rebellion. Let it go. Right there, in the armor. There are written accounts of knights wetting themselves mid-battle. Sometimes even worse. Imagine fighting for your life with that happening in your pants, and then having to stand in it for hours. And remember, bathing wasn't exactly popular. So after a few accidents, your armor wasn't just heavy, it was toxic, a rusty, reeking, full of bacteria, which meant even a tiny scratch could turn into a serious infection. Oh, and did I mention the itching? No modern underwear, no breathable fabrics. You couldn't scratch your back, your chest, or even your leg if something crawled in. Fleas were common, lice unavoidable. Knights were often seen standing completely still in public, not because they were stoic, but because they didn't want to shift and feel that squish of sweat and grime against their skin. And don't even think about falling down. A knight who tripped could struggle to stand back up without help. Heroic? Maybe. Comfortable? Absolutely not. Now picture trying to sleep in all of this. You're in a cold tent or maybe on the ground with your sword for a pillow. You're supposed to be resting, but your helmet is pinning your ears and your chest plate is digging into your ribs. Not to mention the coughing. Medieval soldiers often slept in groups, and between the snoring, the wheezing, and the rats scuttling past your face, you were lucky to get more than a few hours. So yes, you were brave, you were honored, but you were also damp, sore, constipated, and perpetually itchy. Not exactly the fairy tale, is it? And yet, this was the easy part, because next, we'll follow you into battle, where the glory ends and the nightmare begins. You've made it through years of training, you've endured layers of itchy, rusting metal. You've learned to ignore every bodily function except survival. Now, you're ready for war. Or so you think, because this isn't the epic battle scene from a fantasy movie. This is real medieval warfare, and it sucks. Let's begin with the weather. The battlefield was either bone dry and dusty, choking your lungs with every breath, or an endless swamp of soggy dirt that turned your boots into anchors. There was no in-between. You were either inhaling your own chainmail sweat or stuck knee-deep in mud that smelled suspiciously like yesterday's latrine. You're trying to charge into glory, but your horse refuses to cooperate. Yes, knights rode horses, but contrary to popular belief, horses weren't exactly eager to gallop into walls of screaming men with spears. War horses were strong, yes, but also temperamental, easily spooked, and had zero interest in dying with you. Half of the time, you were dragging your horse. The other half, your horse was dragging you. And when the fighting began, you didn't hear noble horns or heroic chants. You heard screams, groans, metal hitting bone, and the unmistakable sound of someone vomiting nearby. If you were lucky, you blocked the first few blows. If you were unlucky, you got knocked down. And remember, if you fell in full armor, getting up wasn't just hard, it was humiliating. You'd be lying there, flailing like an overturned skillet, trying to stand before someone decided your helmet looked like a convenient stepping stool. Let's pause for a moment, breathe in and out, and try to imagine the smell. Hundreds of men in unwashed armor, fighting, sweating, bleeding, often relieving themselves right where they stood because there was nowhere else to go. Add in rotting food, horse dung, and the occasional burning village in the distance, and yes, the fleas survived it all. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. But wait, it gets worse. Let's say you got wounded, not fatally, just a nice deep gash across the arm. Do you get antiseptic? Painkillers? Number. You get a wet rag, maybe some honey, and a prayer that the wound doesn't smell funny tomorrow. Infection was the real enemy. One small cut could end your knightly career faster than any sword. And then there's the glory part. What did glory mean? You might get a pat on the back from a noble, a slightly bigger tent, maybe a roast chicken. But most of the time, you just limped away from battle sore, deaf in one ear, and wondering if your teeth were still attached. And congratulations, you get to do it all again next week. But don't worry, at least you didn't have to clean your own sword. That was your squire's job. Poor guy. You've survived the battlefield. You didn't fall off your horse. You didn't catch the plague, yet. And now, you've returned to your castle. Sounds relaxing, right? Wrong. Castles were less cozy sanctuary and more stone refrigerator with a rat problem. Let's start with the obvious. It was cold, not chilly, not brisk. We're talking stone walls that turned your breath into fog. Fireplaces helped, but mostly just the people standing inside them. And insulation? Never heard of it. The wind blew straight through the cracks in the wall. The windows were glorified holes, and the bed? Oh, it wasn't soft, it was straw. Itched like guilt and smelled like old cheese. But hey, at least you had food. Well, sort of. See, food in medieval castles was a whole experience, and not in a good way. Unless you think boiled oats with a hint of sadness sounds gourmet. Let's go through the menu. Breakfast, maybe a stale chunk of bread dipped in ale, because medieval water was basically poison. Lunch, if you were lucky, some salted pork. If not, turnip stew, again. Dinner, more stew. Surprise, it's still turnips. And spices, those were for the nobles. You were lucky if your food tasted like anything. In fact, one of the top causes of medieval disappointment was biting into something and not knowing if it was edible or just warm. Dessert? Yes, but only if your idea of sweetness involves dried fruit glued together with beeswax. Now, let's talk entertainment. When you weren't preparing for war or shivering through supper, you got to wait for something to happen. Maybe a visiting noble, maybe a hunting trip, maybe your armor rusting just enough to collapse in on itself. Knights didn't spend their time sword fighting in the courtyard for fun. Most of their free time was spent sitting in council meetings and managing land disputes or pretending to care about someone's poetry. The feast? Loud, long, overcooked meat, bad wine, and the chance to accidentally insult someone's family by choosing the wrong seat. One wrong word and boom, congratulations. You've started a blood feud that lasts for 3 generations. But here's the best part. You couldn't say no to any of this, because knights had obligations, vassal to lord, oath to king, promise to serve, and if you didn't show up, they'd send a letter, or a sword, and don't forget the church. You had to be pious, humble, virtuous, unless you were on campaign, in which case, anything goes. So yes, castle life was technically peaceful, but only in the way that sitting alone in a dark room for hours is peaceful. Which honestly sounds kind of perfect for falling asleep, doesn't it? Take a breath, relax your jaw. Try not to imagine the fleas in your straw mattress, because next, we'll talk about what happens when a knight retires. Spoiler, it's not a beach in the south of France. Awesome, here's the final piece to your sleep story masterpiece. So, you survived. Decades of marching, fighting, feasting, freezing, and feigning enthusiasm for poetry. You're no longer a squire, or a battlefield brawler, or the guy who had to sleep in his own armor juice. You're a retired knight. Now what? Well, retirement in the Middle Ages didn't exactly come with beachfront property and a pension. For most knights, retirement meant one of 3 things. Option 1. You join a monastery, you shave your head, take a vow of silence, and spend your days copying Latin texts while pretending not to regret your entire life. Option 2. You stay on your land, assuming you were granted any, and try to manage it, which meant collecting taxes, settling disputes, and yelling at peasants about their chickens wandering onto your cabbage field. Option 3. You do nothing, because you're broke, arthritic, and can't afford a new horse. Some knights did alright. They married well, earned titles, or even got comfy royal gigs as advisors. But many simply faded, forgotten by kings they served, outshined by younger, shinier knights with better hair. And physically, your body was a medieval history book of injuries. You had chronic back pain from years in armor, knee joints that cracked like wagon wheels, scars from battles you only half remember, and probably one good tooth left, if that. Oh, and let's not forget the emotional side. You've seen friends die. You've committed questionable things in the name of duty. You've carried the weight of loyalty, honor, and other ideas that sounded noble when you were 16 and dumb. Now, in your twilight years, you're haunted less by ghosts and more by the realization that the songs sung about knights were written by people who never were knights, and yet you made it, somehow through war and winter, fleas and feast, betrayal and boredom, you endured, and maybe, just maybe, your name is carved into some old chapel wall, misspelled of course, but it's there. So as you lay down your rusty sword and sink into a bed that still feels like hay over rocks, you can finally rest, not because the world is at peace, but because you don't have to wear the armor anymore. And now, dear listener, modern warrior of the screen and blanket, close your eyes, take one last breath, and know this: no matter how stressful your day was, at least you didn't have to joust someone in 60 pounds of metal while constipated. Sweet dreams, and may your armor stay unworn forevermore. Thank you for spending your night with us. If this medieval misery helped you unwind, consider giving the video a gentle tap on that like button, just like a knight knocking politely on a castle door. And if you want more sleepy stories that make history a little less heroic, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. We post new bedtime disasters every week. Comment below with the worst part of being a knight, and let's be honest, it's probably the fleas. Until next time, sleep well, dream strange, and be glad you weren't born in 1347.